Brain bingo. 20th, 2023 to order. Members of the board, what is your pleasure in regard to the approval of the agenda?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Powell,
I move we approve the agenda for the work session of the Wilson County Board of Education dated April 20th, 2023.
Second.
it has been moved by Mrs. Powell, seconded by both Mr. Boykin and Mr. Mercer, that the agenda for April 20th, 2023 work session be approved. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, let it be known by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. Please be advised that the meeting is being live streamed through the Wilson County Schools YouTube channel. The public can also view the meeting through the links on the Wilson County Schools Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages, and the Wilson County Schools website. In person, we have board members, Mrs. Barnes, Mrs. Boyette, Mr. Boykin, Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Powell, myself, Dr. Fitch, and on remote is Mr. Breen, who is a little under the weather today. Mr. Breen, I need to have you, since we can't hear you, if you would please give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to, or send a text to Mrs. Harrison as to how your vote is for the approval of the agenda. Or if you can speak and see if we can hear you. We're not hearing you. Along comes the blues. Okay, we can't hear you, but would you give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Hello?
I hear you. Yes. We hear you now. We took a vote in regard to approval of the agenda for this work session. Can you give us a response as to whether you vote in favor of or in opposition to the approval of the agenda, please? Is that a yes or a no, sir? Now, he can't hear us at all.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If Mr. Bean is able to participate, we should do a roll call vote. If he's not, then we'll just count him as not present and continue on with the 6 remaining board members.
Okay.
Yeah, he can call in, yeah.
Mrs. Harrison, would you please send him a message that he may call in, and that with him being absent, we will need a roll call vote so that in the process of all of this, he can submit his vote through Mrs. Harrison if he cannot be heard.
He needs to do it simultaneously with the voting. We need to hear him.
All right,
So if you call my number, I'll place my phone up there and you can see.
all right. I know you're not hearing this, Mr. Breen, but Dr. Wilson is going to place her phone. I hope you're at least hearing. Is going to place her phone so that if you call in, hopefully we'll get your voice vote.
I texted him to call.
I was calling them.
When technology works, it works. When it does not, hello, it's a nightmare.
Hello?
Hey, Mr. Breen.
Hi.
All right, there was a motion on the floor to approve the agenda for today's meeting. There was a motion on the floor to approve. There was a motion on the floor to approve today's agenda, and Ms. Cornetta has indicated that we will have to do a voice vote, a roll call vote, since you are not physically present. So those in favor of the approval of the agenda, please, as I call your name, record your response. Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Boyette?
Aye.
Mr. Boykin?
Aye.
Mr. Mercer?
Aye.
Mrs. Powell?
Aye.
Myself, Dr. Fitch, aye, and Mr. Breen? All right, thank you. Now,
Business.
please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to be followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Members of the board and members of the public, we are at a work session that is again dealing with the facility planning. At our last meeting, we were presented with some options. We have asked the architects to go back to the drawing board to resubmit for consideration of a smaller footprint for a smaller population, and some of that is coming back to us today. So, Dr. Mills, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's proceed for today.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, board members, and others. For today, I've got 4 global areas, the first being the discussion and the decision on the new Frederick Douglass Elementary School. We need to make a decision about the second elementary school project. I want to talk a little bit about the consolidation topic of the Stansburg into Spate, and we can bring that back at our next scheduled work session. And just want to touch base on that very quickly. And then there's a few miscellaneous items just want to remind you of and introduce. But the bulk of today's meeting is we really need to provide direction to the architects so they can get started. And they are in attendance today along with Barnhill. So for Frederick Douglass, you remember we discussed previously, Toys Not's in the process of being retrofitted. This is same information as before, but I put in here as just a placeholder for handouts. We do anticipate the current Frederick Douglass being empty in preparation for demolition right in the first part of August. The transition to Toys Not is going well. That move will take place right after school ends through those work days, and work has already begun on that. So everything is in transition and ready to go. So the next step is for us to make those decisions and move ahead. Commissioners have asked us, as I mentioned last time, to apply again for the needs-based public school capital funds. That deadline has usually been in August. We've been checking and making sure the forms haven't been put out yet, and that we're usually notified in October. To date, we've gotten back the 60% design study from Skinner, Farlow, and Kerwin. We've got some cost estimates from Barnhill that I've shared with you earlier. And then the board asked Skinner, Farlow, and Kerwin to come back and reduce the size of the school to accommodate 520 students. So that's the play-by-play so far. The new information is I've just shared the report with the board and the county manager for the information on Frederick Douglass to date. In my discussions with the county manager, the county commissioners have indicated they will provide $27 million for the new Frederick Douglass. Skinner, Farlow, Kerwin has completed a community input event. They held a student input event today, and they'll have a meeting with the staff and a work day at the end of the year. So next steps then are to take a look at this large handout with A, B, and C on it that the architects have provided us. And that's the directions that the architect's gonna need to move ahead for regarding which of the three options for Frederick Douglass are palatable to the board. These are within the confines of the funding that we will receive. But I will leave it up to the architects and Barnhill to talk some about that. But I wanted them to have time today specifically to go through that and share these three options and walk you through and answer any questions. So with that, I'll turn it kind of over to the architects. Yeah, it'll be fine, Brad.
Can I ask if you would please move to the
Yeah,
podium?
he was gonna come
so-
up there.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Mills, and thank you, board members, for meeting with us today. We had a great day, I just want to say, with the students at Frederick Douglass. We met, Alicia and myself, and 4 people from our office met with pretty much every student at the school, and it was wonderful. It was eye-opening, and the students know what they need and they know what they want. So they didn't have any trouble sharing their opinions either. But we had a great time. But A, B, and C here, well, I'll just start by saying C is the option, the smallest option that we showed you last time. We also had 3 options last time. And so we realized that we needed to get the school smaller even than what the C option was. So we went back and studied the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. They give guidelines on all different sizes of schools. So I went through each of these line items and compared it to what they recommended. A few spaces got smaller, maybe 1 or 2 got bigger, but most spaces got smaller. So B, A, and B are basically that exercise to reduce the size of the school as much as we could. DPI does not have a stance on learning commons yet. I think they're still trying to catch up with, some of the current thinking on that now. So really the A option is sort of the DPI recommended elementary school. It's for 466 students. The core would be for 600 actually, and all 3 of the, well, in these 2 it's for 600. The one previously was for 500. So 466, both of them are the same. And really A and B, the only difference is learning commons outside of each group of grade classrooms from grades 2 through 5. So that will give you places for students to do, if they need to do projects outside the classroom or with smaller groups, or if they just need time, to go and have a place that they can calm down before they come back to the room. It gives also flexibility in that in the future, you could come back and you could use that as a classroom if you had to. So it's really building something a little more for the future than the smallest option. And it's the one that we would recommend. However, we realize, budgets are tight, and so we wanted to bring that to your attention and get your input on it. I think that's it, really.
At 466, and when we asked for the reduction in footage and numbers of students, what was our number, 520? So at 466, given the current student population, and we were looking at 520, how do we accommodate those extra students that were in our previous count?
You have enough that are in your current population to cover the population as it is now. The projections from ORED, at some point out I think at the end of the projection cycle, reach 484, but again, that's optimal, everything all the way out. So they are in line with where we are right now with their projections. But again, that would be plus or minus space you could handle for a building. But you're within limits.
And so if our student population were to grow beyond that 466, then what he's saying about the common space could become a classroom, and that hopefully would
It
accommodate
could,
the
I mean,
change.
that would not be ideal. The ideal way to grow it would be to add classrooms to it.
Right.
But if you were in a pinch, say for 1 year or something, it would be something you could do.
And the footprint that you provide would accommodate to add classrooms?
Yes,
at a-
yeah,
at a
we'll
certain
do, whichever we go with, we'll plan so that we can add on to the building, yes.
So when you say for the footprint, you're gonna have room to add on, but do each of these plans have that, accommodation for 600 students in the common areas?
They do.
Okay.
They both do, yes. So the media center, the cafeteria would be sized for 600. And that's based, I think, on 3 seatings for lunch for the cafeteria.
Board members, do you have other questions?
I would just, I'm sorry.
No,
Madam
ma'am,
Chair,
go ahead.
I
Mrs.
just
Barnes.
wanted to know maybe, because I'm interested in what's, maybe one or two of the opinions of the students for what they wanted.
Oh, it was amazing. And we will provide you with a report that sort of summarizes that, but we have, you've been in the gymnasium at that school. We filled the walls all the way on 3 sides of the gymnasium with pictures that we basically met with each grade level over an hour. And we divided into 6 groups, so there was maybe 8 to 10 to 12 students at every table. So really, everybody got to put input. They drew pictures of what they, some of them were what you would expect from children, and some of them were actually very astute. I mean, we had students that were saying if we had a place we could go, they would say something like, to rest my brain, or, and it's one of these common spaces that, it was a pull-out room where you could go and calm down if you needed to, or do something quiet. They asked for quiet reading spaces. They asked for noisy reading spaces. What were some of the other things, Alicia?
In terms of indoors, they were really interested in all the arts, music.
Could I get,
Sorry.
could I get you to come to the
Oh,
mic?
I'm sorry about that.
Because we're being broadcast.
Yes, ma'am. So a number of the spaces they asked for on the inside that they were interested in outside of the classrooms were music rooms, art rooms, places, that they could dance or have different kinds of sports, basketball, karate, it was very, very active things. They were very interested in a media center, a place where they could read and have books. A lot of them asked for books. They really wanted books. And then in terms of outside, they were very interested, again, in what I call large movement activity. So basketball, soccer, places where they could really run around and play on teams. And they were, of course, a lot of them loved a new playground. And some of them, as Brad said, were very astute. One student said, we really want light that is bright enough for us to read and do our work, but not so bright that it's distracting. So, so that was very interesting, some of their astute comments about color and how that affects their daily life at school. So, thank you. We appreciated the time that the school gave us to do that.
Great.
It was really fun for us, and it was really great to just get their energy and their input. So I appreciate you all allowing the school to have us come. It was a blessing for us to be able to do that.
Mr. Breen, do you have any questions that come to mind? And I'm not sure that you are able to see this presentation.
I've got like 5 or 6 different apps working right now. I'm watching you live on YouTube and looking at the things that Dr. Mills has passed out as well, but I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Got one.
Mr. Borkin?
For the 3 different scenarios that are given, how close are y'all estimating that we're gonna be to the 27 million mark?
This is really more of a size. We know that we're over budget, so we're trying to get the size as small as we can. But at some point, you can't get it any smaller. I mean, I think, our A option for the size school you want is probably the smallest we would recommend. I think the B gives you more flexibility. But it's not, This exercise is just trying to get it as small as possible. The cost is still yet to be determined, once it's designed.
So, I mean, yeah, well, I think what I'm getting at is that, you know, the size of what we're looking at is gonna, a lot of it's gonna be determined based on cost,
Mhm.
being that we, you know, they've drawn a line in the sand, basically. You know, don't cross it. What, yeah, if B is gonna, you know, shooting off the hip, if B's gonna run 27 million, then, you know, it might would be necessary to go with A in case there was a cost overrun.
I'm not sure, and we won't know for sure until, you know, as the economy is getting, I think it's getting better, but we won't really know until we bid it. And adding those spaces back that are in the center of the, so the way that it would be designed is each grade would sort of be surrounding a central space. That's not something that can probably easily be added in like if we decided to do that later. So it's just, I don't know how to answer it exactly because you know, the cost may exceed 27 million. I mean,
Even on the smallest?
it could, yeah. Based.
If you're gonna answer, okay, please.
No, I think that from our perspective, we haven't had a large school bid since, what would be the late spring of 2021. So we are not sure about what kind of costs we're getting. We're designing a school, another elementary school that's now just at 60% complete with, I'm talking about the drawings, not just a program for it. And the estimates, you know, are high. I mean, high, over $400 a foot, and you're like, wow, where did this come from? You know, it's hard for us to even understand. We don't know. So if the option B is 79,000 feet, you know, you can start doing the math by saying, well, if it was $350 a foot, if it was $375, or it's $400, you know. But right now, we haven't designed the school to the point where you know how high the walls are, you know what kind of HVAC system, all these things that really come into play, as well as how much site work for this particular school on this particular site, which may vary a lot from, say, another school, you know, somewhere else with a much different site, more site work. So until more of that is enumerated to the construction manager, which is Barnhill, it's hard to get what I would say is a more refined estimate, because that's what we're talking about now. So that's why it's hard for us to say, well, it's 79,000 feet, but if you know, it's hard for us to say it would be 27 million. You know, which I know y'all, it's a struggle, because now if you're confined to that dollar amount, then in today's, the way construction costs have zoomed in the last 10 months, you know, but will they settle down and maybe lessen, you know, when the private work kind of is less? All plays into that, and I wish we did know that answer, but quite frankly, we don't. I'll let Barnhill speak to that, but basically, you know, we don't know. Based on my prior schools, it would, but we're not dealing with what was happening in 2021, or, you know, when 2022 rolled around about mid-year, that's when it just really seemed to me to have just skyrocketed, if you will, which is very frustrating for everybody and us too, to try to pinpoint a budget so that you're able to define the square footage and the number of students that will allow you to have this kind of school that you want. And I'll let Barnhill speak.
Good evening. I'm Joey Wilkins with Barnhill Contract and run our pre-con estimating department. So what we've seen over the last 2 years has probably been about a 40% increase in construction costs specifically to K through 12. So if this was 2 years ago, then your budget would have been fine. We are seeing the data now. like Ben mentioned with the private sector, the interest rates. We are seeing the data show that stabilizing. It usually doesn't go down that I've seen in the last 100 years. Usually once it gets to, a certain level, it may stabilize, but not really start going back down in cost. So with the 73,794, I just did some quick figuring on some recent bids. There's going to be some wiggle room in the design. Again, as Ben mentioned, I would say that wiggle room would be maybe 10% at max. We're seeing schools around $400 a square foot. So the quick math, I think I can do it.
So that puts you over almost automatic, even on the smallest.
On all of them, the closest one to 400 is A, and that's $365. If you just went on footage.
That's just what we've been seeing, and
I'm not arguing or questioning it or anything like that, but I think it's pretty obvious that what we need, unless something changes or we find more money somewhere else, that $27 million is not going to build a school that we probably need or want. And while the county commissioners has been good to us, and I think they care about the children in the county, and I don't know how they arrived at $27 million. That I don't know. But what I do feel is that if we know we're running short, we need to come up with a design that will provide for these children properly and the proper number. And if it's over 27 million, then go to the county commissioners with that amount and address it as a group between school board and the county commissioners. But I think we're not making very good progress to say if we're limited to that, and it'd be a real killer to come up with, find another source of money after we've already got halfway through a project. I think we owe it to the children out there, as we owe it to all of the children. And I think that the county commissioners care, we care. I don't see how we can do it any differently, to be honest with you, other than get the experts that draw up these plans, come up with the most efficient, best plan you can without being extravagant, and then work from there. That's my opinion, and I'm just one of the group, of course.
I have a question for Dr. Mills, I guess. If we get the needs-based grant, will that be money on top of the 27 million that the county commissioners would give us, or that would be
It'll be within that money.
within that money? Wow.
I don't believe it's in addition. That's not how Watt did.
Well,
What's this one?
I mean, it just looks like to me that, if we need to, I mean, I respect the option of B and y'all, that being y'all's favorite. But if we already know that we're gonna go over budget or be close to budget where we are, then I think that, in my opinion, we should go with A, because it does shave off roughly 6,000 square foot, and I think that we should get hard numbers on it and sit down with the county commissioners.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Boyer,
I would, agree that A is the better plan. For one, it has everything that DPI recommends, according to Mr. Skinner. And the Learning Commons, while it sounds good, and it could be good with adequate personnel, the thoughts of having a place where a child could go to calm down, well, that only works if you have an adult that can go with, to supervise that child. And and knowing that facilities are very important, but the number one thing are the human resources that are in that facility. And putting that in combination with the needs that we have all over the county for the other schools, by virtue of the fact that we're talking about this one and two more at the same time, A would be my preference, of these.
Can we get a little clarification, just so that we're all on the same page? When you talk about learning commons, you're speaking of media center, you're speaking of, what is your definition
So-
of learning commons, please?
Sure. A learning commons in this situation would be space outside. So if we group, say, the first grade sort of around a central area, that would be the learning commons. So it's not in the media center, it's not, it's specific to that grade. And sometimes it would include just space in the hallway, and sometimes it would include space in the hallway and maybe a little room, a meeting room. So that's basically what it is.
If I might, Dr. Fitch, at Hearn Elementary, I just visited there, they have the commons area.
Mhm.
And then they have the classrooms, all being able to use that commons area.
Right.
And it was useful when I was there because it was a place I could go and take kids out to read. And as Mrs. Boyd said, you gotta have a human being there.
Right, uh-huh.
And one child was sent out to kind of cool off, and he saw us and kind of quieted and calmed down.
Mhm.
But Hearn would be a good example of what the commons areas
Okay.
would look like.
Yep, that's what it is. And schools typically have been doing it in the older grades and less, like kindergarten and first grade may not need it as much as fifth grade. So it would probably tend to get bigger as the children get bigger.
So as you have done your preliminary plans, every grade level has a learning common.
Well, our previous preliminary plan that you saw did. However, this proposed B option takes it out of, I think, first grade and kindergarten.
Okay.
So we're trying to squeeze everywhere we can, and we think it's less important there, so.
And what happens in A?
In A, all those things are gone.
They're off, there are
They're
no
not there.
learning commons
Right.
at all.
You just
Okay.
have a corridor, and it's not extra big, you know, so it's just, it's like a typical school, you know, an older school that you would see.
Okay.
So, one other thing, so, you know, say roughly around 400 square foot, 365, 400, you know, somewhere in that range. That's to build it. That doesn't include the demolition, does it?
We've estimated the abatement and the demo to be somewhere around $650,000 to $750,000. So if you divide that out, it's probably $4 or $5 a square foot, maybe. So it's gonna be close. It's not a huge square foot price on it.
Other questions? For the record, please note that Mrs. Boyette has asked to be excused for a prior commitment at this time, so that now we have 6 persons in attendance, 5 present in the boardroom, and Mr. Breen by remote. Okay. So members of the board, what other questions do you have?
I don't have any more.
Madam Chair, I don't have a question,
Okay.
but I just have a comment to make that I do like the idea of having a learning commons area. I taught at Margaret Hearn, and I like the fact they had an area where you actually could take the child out. And there were some that would actually tutor, or we have some parents that would come and mentor a child, and that area was needed at that time. And I see, like you said, in A, it's not in the scenario for A, but it is in B and also C.
Well, okay.
That's just a comment.
Okay, thank you. Well, my overall question is, if we are limited to $27 million, and we are already hearing that even with the scale down of A, and with the projected cost at $400 a square foot, we're gonna be over 27 million before we even move a shovel to do anything. So the question then is, what do we do and where do we go? And how do we instruct architects, builders, administration, how do we instruct how to proceed at this point?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Borkin?
So, we won't be able to, have a hard number until we choose a plan to go with and ask for it.
Okay,
But if it comes in at 400 a square foot, give or take, then, the A plan would put us roughly 2 million over.
okay,
And I would feel comfortable going to the county commissioners and making that argument.
okay,
But if we went with something that was 6,000 to 10,000 square foot higher, then they would say, well, why, I feel like they would come back and say, well, why didn't y'all go with the option that was closest to where we were aiming?
Madam Chair,
yes, sir.
when I was talking with county manager, that is a hard number, but I do believe if we get close to that with a design that will meet the standard, then there could be some discussion to get us through. But I don't believe that there's enough of a wiggle space to go up in spec from my conversations with him informally to add on things. So it would be very tight
Okay,
regardless, but what Mr. Boykin is saying is that kind of some of the general conversation was, that's a pretty hard number, but if you're right there at it and the cost of the buildings right now is obscene, then I think that would be a good thing for the board to do, to present that rather than not presenting anything, because that's not gonna get us ahead.
right. So what is the pleasure of the board? If, given the figures and the projections and whatever, and we do hope and pray that the cost of everything would go down, that would be ideal. What is your pleasure,
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mercer?
and I've sat here did a little calculating this. I think, Mr. Boykin is correct in saying matter of fact, it's about 2.5 million. And when you add demolition to it, you're looking at 3 million for Plan A. And it's about 4.7 million difference if you look at $400 a square feet for Plan B. Plus, it's about 5 and 0.3 by the time you put the demolition to it. I hadn't even calculated the other, and I didn't think there was much need. Because we're getting, I think you're looking at, somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million we'd have to ask for just for Plan A. And I still make my point that, and let me state it again and maybe put it a little differently. And again, with all respect to the county commissioners, and I think they care about kids, it's not about questioning that. But I think it's our place to try to determine what we need for the children and be prudent about it and not try to go crazy with dollars. But I think it's our place to try to figure what we need for the children and go to them and see if they can't pay for it. I mean, that's kind of simple, but I feel that's the way it is. And I think we're not doing justice to the children and the schools if we don't do it that way. So, if we could do it for 27 million, I'd be tickled to death, but I don't think we are. And we need to get information to support what we're telling the county commissioners and go to them and say, right, this is where we are. And you're saying, well, you have this much money, we're saying this, we need something that's gonna cost more than that, what are we gonna do? And then figure it out. But, we aren't doing a lot of good for the children if we don't go for what they need.
Also, Dr. Fitzgerald is sitting here thinking, we talk about Wilson on the go, on the move, growth. And if we build a school that's not ideal for a setting, and they were pushed to do another one, I feel like we've been pushed to do another one. You do something first, you do it well, and then you go to the next portion of the project, I guess. Because my feeling is, we do Frederick Douglass, we do it as it's supposed to be, with the monies hopefully that will be there, and then we look at doing something to build a second school. That's just my opinion.
All right. So I'll raise the question again. How do you want to proceed,
Madam Chair,
Mr. Boykin?
I moved that we instruct the architects to move forward with Plan A.
Second.
It has been moved by Mr. Boykin, seconded by Mr. Breen, that we authorize the adoption of Plan A and to move forward with that. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please record your vote. Mrs. Barnes,
Reluctantly, aye.
Mr. Boykin,
Aye.
Mr. Mercer,
Uh,
Mr. Breen,
Aye.
Mrs. Powell,
I always say children first, but because we're trying to stay within the budget. Aye.
and myself. I understand the dilemma that we are in. I think that even though we may lose the learning commons, and we are back to the traditional type of construction of a school with a hallway, but the learning goes on within the classroom setting. And given the financial constraints, my vote is aye for Plan A. So let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously 6-0, since Mrs. Boyette is no longer present to cast a vote. Let me thank the architects and Barnhill for all of the work that has gone in thus far in making the shifts that have been asked for. First with the reduction of footage, second with a reduction in the student population, and now within the constraints of the financial availability of the funds. We thank you. We look forward to a very, very well-done new school. And if you do half as well for us as you did with the Watt construction, the plans and the building, everything that went into it, we know that you will do an outstanding job for the children of the system. And we're going to hope, pray, cross our fingers and everything else that the costs begin to come down so that we can stay within the constraints that we have been given in terms of finances. So again, on behalf of the board, I thank you for all of the work that has gone into this progress, into this process. We look forward to being able to relocate the students of Frederick Douglass for the next school year and for the work to begin. It's been a process, but we're going to be waiting with bated breath for outstanding results, and we thank you so very much.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Sorry,
Mrs. Powell.
Yes, I was wondering if maybe I could share, we had a community event at Frederick Douglass, a few weeks ago, and that was really nice. I really enjoyed that. I attended that. So nothing's been said about that. I wonder if maybe they would be able to give us some input of how that came out.
Okay, this is the input given by the community in regards to what they were looking to see in the facility.
Yes, ma'am. So, again, thank you for allowing us to have that community event, and it was really insightful for those of us who attended from our firm, and I think also for members of the community across from the alumni all the way through. We had some young students there as well, came with a family. We learned a lot about the culture of that school, and it was just wonderful to hear a culture of real care and love and concern for the families and students that went there. And that was from the alumni all the way through. I had a lot of new parents say that's why they were there. Very excited about the STEM curriculum that's at that school, and also very excited about the Spanish immersion that's at that school. a lot of the things that we heard were, some of the things you normally hear. We need more space for storage, right? But a lot of the history of the school was expressed there, so we heard a lot about the history of the school, and that was really interesting for us. We're new to this school, right, to hear about the history of the school. So we are planning on putting together, now that we've had this student input session, and once then we meet with staff, we're planning on putting together a report that has some of the images and captures the main themes of what we've learned from the community, from the students, and from your staff. So that's something you can expect from our firm to be coming out in the near future. So that will elaborate more than I can say here. So again, we thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right. Dr. Mills?
All right.
Now that we've handled Frederick Douglass,
Next.
next.
All right. We have discussed previously at our last work session, possibility of looking at the existing well site for a new elementary school. So some of this is existing information that you've seen before. But I do think before we can proceed, we need to get a vote from the board so we can get some direction to talk about the needed planning and for me to talk with the county manager about next steps. Again, the issue with that is it's going to be a much larger school, given the capacities and the size of those two schools. But the existing site for Wells does have the acreage to hold that. That was something we discussed last time. So if you remember, Wells has a new section around beginning around the media center in that fifth grade hall out to the playground area. So there is some part of the footprint there that is newer. And remember, we talked about Hearn is landlocked completely and on a very small acreage. And there could be some interest in that from Barton College. We talked about that too. There was some discussion about that. But again, if you look at GIS maps, they're still not available. Those layers are still not available, but it's the same one from last time. But catchment areas and assignment areas are overlapping all throughout town, and that's been very steady. In fact, we've seen some increases for those schools. So we don't have to figure out where to get the land from. We don't have to figure out where to site the school. We've got existing acreage right there. So all that's in place. But the question would be, can we do that with school in place? I don't know yet. There's some questions we would have to explore and find that out. But the first thing is, do we have your authority to go ahead and say this is the site for the next elementary school plan? We talked about lots of different ones, but this one is right in the middle of town, and we know it's pretty straightforward decision about this will work or won't work. So it's not a matter, again, trying to find a location, where your growth patterns, where everything else. Both these sites could benefit from that. So I think it's important for the board to go ahead and put that second elementary school out there, because both these schools need updating. And there are some other conversations we can have of need for elementary schools at our next work session, and we can prepare for that. But, and I do have one more conversation we've talked about previously to get your permission or approval for going forward in a second. But this one seemed to be, the conversation generally at the table was, this makes sense. So I would like for the board to go ahead and put it to a vote to say, let's proceed with some planning and some information, and allow me to tell the county manager, share with the county commissioners, this is the choice for the next elementary school that we would like to get funding for. Because now that we can proceed with Frederick Douglass, then the question is going to be, okay, well, we talked about 2 or 3, so what's your next one? So I think we need to be prepared to do that, and so this is the next step. If we get into some of the other ones out in the county, then we've got to figure out where land issues are, and the capacity and density is not the same. This is. You have, almost 800 kids right there. So it's not going to be a matter of a need. And those buildings, again, are certainly within your wheelhouse of needing some replacement and upgrades, even with the small addition at Wells back in 95, 96.
Okay.
So,
My question is in regard to, we've had and I know that this will take a period of time to really occur. So I'm assuming you're asking us just for planning purposes.
Yes.
But, because we would have, right now, we have Toys Not converting to elementary to accommodate the Frederick Douglass. Is this going to be after the completion of Frederick Douglass that this would actually take place to give to give a place for those students who are displaced while we do the same type process of a demolition and a rebuild? The question is, where would the students go?
yeah, in talking with the county manager, the impression I get from what the county's trying to do and what we would do too is they're looking at how to manage their debt service and how to manage the funding over time. So you've still got Jones that's wrapping up that debt service. We just started the Watt building was just completed, and now we're talking about Frederick Douglass, and they're doing some things to look at how they would finance some of that, as well as us applying for the needs-based funding. So I don't know that would be, this project, that was the one that they were to say they would do, and everything lines up that this would run concurrently with the work at Frederick Douglass, so I don't think it's a matter of us. That's my initial thoughts. It's probably too much to try and take on everything right now, and if we did run into issues, it might not be the best thing for us not to have a backup plan to be able to relocate students. So from a funding standpoint, it's probably not, timing's not gonna be probably best for anyone to take on that much juice, if you will, for those projects, given what we don't know about the market right now. And you have the experts out there in the field that are telling you that right now. So I don't foresee that being a challenge, but I wouldn't want to do that unless we had a place to make sure our kids were safe anyway. So I would err on the side of, I wouldn't do this until we had that school open, or nearly open, so it was just a matter of doing a piece at a time as we go. And those are significant numbers. It's not like we can just run them down the street to Hearn if we start, there's no room. So, but I do think we're safe to ask the county commissioners, you asked us to identify another elementary school. This one's got merit across the board. This would allow us to update one school almost totally and reduce our footprint on the other. And it's right in the heart of Wilson, and we know it's gonna be well used and it makes sense. So I don't think there's gonna be a lot of discussion about that. So I think it'll be a quick process to get to approval and support for that. And again, it's not gonna displace everyone because they're right in their locations already. So I think that would make a lot of sense. And finally, I do think it's important for the board to continue moving forward and saying, this is our next step, because we've got some discussions that will take some time and more planning. And this will allow us to go ahead and have these on the board to be done. And will allow us the luxury of saying, okay, now we've got these planned out, let's plan our next 2 or 3. So, if that makes sense.
I just have a positive comment. When talking with the principal at Hearn, he has really been excited about the students that have come to him from Hearn, and they have blended in well. He said, no issues, and that was good to hear.
Is it Winston to Hearn?
Those that have come from Winston to Hearn.
Yeah, we've heard very little from any of that transition. That was a lot of those students between there, Vince Bynum and other. So.
I would imagine, not being in the construction business or architect either one, but I would suspect that when you're looking at cost per square foot, it probably is more when you're adding on to a building than when you're just building a new building, because you have to retrofit and so forth. But With that said, Wells, you would have to be concerned about those common areas, the cafeterias, the libraries, so forth. But all of those none of those are inside, they are part of the building, but they all have exterior areas to expand to without having to modify and those things. So that would be a plus on that. But I like the idea of combining the schools.
So what is your pleasure in regards to directions to the administration for beginning the process for
I just had a thought.
Madam Chair,
planning? Mr. Brain?
I believe that all administration's asking us for is to identify the next site project for the elementary school to follow. And to that end, I would move that we identify the Wells Elementary School footprint and area as the next elementary school project to follow on Frederick Douglass.
Second.
Been moved by Mr. Breen, seconded by Mr. Borkin, that we authorize the administration, or that we, let me see if I heard you right. That we accept the Wells site as planning for the next change in elementary school configuration? Is that wasn't how you said it, and so I realized I repeated that not totally correct, so please correct me where I need it.
I think the only difference is I use the verb identify.
Identify. So it has been moved and properly seconded that we identify the Wells site for the creation of the next new elementary school. Does that sum it up, Mr. Breen?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, let it be known. Ms. Barnes?
Aye.
Mr. Boykin?
Aye.
Mr. Breen?
Aye.
Mr. Mercer? Mrs. Powell?
Aye.
Myself, Dr. Fitch, aye. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. We have identified the well site for the next school project. Dr. Mills?
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair. So, we have touched briefly, and this is, again, this has been discussed previously, but I want to put everything in one handout for you because sometimes things disappear. But we talked about the fact that you have Spate Middle School, which was a newer building on our facilities, and there is capacity existing within that school that would allow for Stansburg Elementary to be combined with it. The power in that is that almost everything as it is now lines up with very little legwork to get to that point from a logistics standpoint, not from a facility standpoint, but existing bus routes, it's the same school assignment area for the most part, same geographic area, if you will, I mean, neighborhoods, those kinds of things. So, but you've got a facility that's much, much newer, was built to handle more. Spade is around 300 right now. Its capacity was 500, built for that. Of course, we know it can hold some more. And Stansburg's at 186. Stansburg's got about one grade level, one class per grade level. So it's very, very easy to combine those into it. And I think doing so would allow Stansburg's students to be in a facility that have much more updated everything, you name it. But it's also within their neighborhood and within their geographic region. So it's not relocating them through redistricting or something else to use your existing space outside of their own area. It's within their existing school assignment area as it is. Stansburg Elementary, we've looked at that a couple of times. There's some need there to update some things. I've shown you those pictures. I'll go down real quick, show a couple of those. That's right around the cafeteria. Computer's a little slow, here it goes. The gym, which has got to be dealt with. But it's also landlocked. There is no room for growth out there. If we wanted to build something out there, that's a very tight-knit community, very supportive community, great town. People are engaged in the school. So they could still be doing that in their own area if they were located at Spade. But I think also that addresses some of the questions and conversations you've had with the county commissioners, which is, how are you using your existing facilities? And so if you were to close Stansburg, but assign those students to Spade, that's using your facilities much more economically and within your home region, if you will. That's not a redistricting in the sense of what people are that is very upsetting. It is a change, but it does avoid having to build a new school. It does avoid having to do some significant upgrades. And again, Spate was built to handle way more students than we've got. And what we're talking about are, there's some things that we could do, and that could be implemented in the 24-25 school year. I don't think we need to do it right now, nor would anyone else, because there's too many questions and too much information needs to be communicated to parents and students and staff. But certainly, there's time for us to do it for the start of the 24-25 school year. It would allow us to reallocate staff with the staffing shortages we have across the district, across the state for teachers. I mean, that is a help. But also, we need to review the spate for any changes to the facility for those things that are requirements. But again, there's a lot of overlap. And there's also some questions. One, what if would be, do we use the start time for the elementary or the middle school? Because it's a K-8 school. So it's just one out there. So that's not to say that's a hard thing to figure out, but you're gonna run into a few challenges as you do that. But I would like for us to be able to bring any additional information back for the May 8th work session so that we could vote, or the board could vote to say this is the scenario we'd like to pursue in order to implement 24-25. Because it's gonna take some planning communication, but before we do that, I wanted to hear from you that this is something you're okay with pursuing before we start doing that. We've been making some visits to the school and looking at some things. There would be some costs involved, as you would with anything like this, like what we're doing at Toys Not right now for Frederick Douglass to go there. But again, that's saving a whole lot of time and money and not having to put students in mobile units and pull power and cut roads in. I mean, there's no parking. All the things that are doing a huge savings to the county and to us are much more safer and reliable than some of the things we deal with. But that's some of the cost of growth and change, but it's a good thing. So before we go any further, we need to kind of know, are there other questions or other things that you may have? You don't have to come up with them right today, but in between. But we'd like to bring back some more information about some of what we see as being the things we'd have to address and to get your blessing on that, for the 24-25 school year. But we could bring that back in May 8th.
Okay. You did answer a couple of questions for me because, as you were speaking, because my question was, when would you see this change occurring? What would be our process in dealing with the conversation with the parents as we looked at closing both Winstead and Forest Hills? I'm sorry, Toys Not. you know, we had a session where we met with the
You'd have to go through the same
families.
process.
Okay.
Yes.
Um,
And I think that's an expectation regardless of whether it's a requirement or not. It's been the board's process anyway, but we certainly want everything to be lined up and I'm sure there were some exceptions, but for the most part, the transition this year with, even though it was very tight from our timeline and the late start, things went well with the transition for our students from Winstead to, as Ms. Barnes just mentioned, and the students from Toysnot. I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule, but when you think of any change of that magnitude, with all the other issues we dealt with as a district over the last several years, I mean, it went very smoothly. But we need to plan and look at things and make sure we have all our ducks in a row, because you're talking about not going apples to apples, you're going apples to oranges with elementary students going into a middle school, and there's other issues we need to deal with as well, and they can be handled, and it is done. But we want to make sure we have all those lined up to answer questions and put people's concerns to rest and address them.
And as we just gave you all the go-ahead to begin planning for that combination of Wells and Hearn, I'm sure that we will be having a public input night into that situation as well.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And this doesn't require, I don't think, and I'm not asking by any means for the board to vote on this today.
Okay.
But I do think by the end of the school year, we need to know this is where we're headed. And then all these other things we talked about can go into play. But there's some homework we need to do, but we also need to know if there's some specific questions that you have going into it, because as we get into the summer and start the school year, it's gonna go fast. And we don't wanna, we wanna be planning and doing things ahead of time so that can take place in 24, 25, because this could be a busy year.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Other questions, Mrs. Barnes?
it's just a comment. I know we're not voting on it, but I think it's a great idea. My grandson goes to an academy, York Academy, K-8, no problems. The students love
Good.
that scenario. And I taught at Stantonsburg in 1996, AG, and it was a sort of an issue with some mold. And I think when I look at those pictures, I saw some of those same paint peels as we have now. It only gets worse. And so I just think it's a great idea at this point to even consider doing that.
Okay. Mr. Barker?
I think you would have my support.
Questions, comments, Mrs. Powell?
Well, as I'm sitting here thinking about Stantsville Elementary, my heart is heavy because of it being such a nice community and the support they have there. I taught at Stantsville Elementary too for a few years, and I know the teachers were always saying that they had taught the grandparents and the mothers of the children they had at that time. So, and I realized looking at the pictures too that we need to do something. That the school has come down, and without having renovations and everything, it happens. And I realize that we still have time, 24, 25. Nothing's definite as yet, but I know we're moving ahead, and we do want our schools to look the best. We want to be able to go to other counties and say we have schools that look just as good as theirs. I get it, I understand what we're trying to do. But as I've always said, it just saddens me to, I guess I'm just kind of sentimental. I guess I'm just an old baby about things like that. Just hate having to close those schools that meant so much to us, that we've been there so long. But I know that time, tells all, and change is something that we have to do. We want to improve.
Mr. Mercer?
I can't add a lot. The sentiment strikes my heart too, but the children have to be healthier in a building that's properly ventilated, and if upgrades can be made to the air circulation system if need be. And I just don't think it would be dollar wise to, just that one area, try to do that at the current building at Stantonsburg would be just too expensive. So, and I think the the proximity and the support that's been given to Stantonsburg could be given to that same group of students if they happen to be moved. And it's not very far. I mean, literally, to drive from, the middle school to Stantonsburg School's, what, 3 miles at max? If it's that much.
It's short.
It's a short distance. So I understand it, and I can see the benefit in it, so I would have to be in favor of it.
Mr. Breen, any comments, questions?
I agree, let's run that rabbit.
Well, I know that there are some people who are watching us live. Some will be watching us at a later point, before the phones start ringing off the hook. Please know that we have not taken a formal vote. We are in planning discussion mode. And we are working to be of most benefit to the children in the areas that we are talking about, whether it is Stantonsburg, whether it is Wells, Hearn. Our conversations are open. We have open minds, but we also know that there are changes. When we look at the age of some of our buildings, just think of yourself as an aging person, and how you started out is not how you're winding up. And so in this instance, we can possibly replace and modify so that the health and the welfare and the well-being of the students, and any time that there is a change discussed, it is something that not only affects you and the community, but it affects us as board members who have to make the decisions, and we do not take this lightly. So we look forward to points that you will make at the May 8th work session. Members of the board, I will ask if you have particular areas or questions that you want to give to the administration, that you please do so that that can be incorporated within the report brought to us on May 8th at the next work session. And if there is nothing else in regard to the retrofitting of Spate, then I'm going to ask Dr. Mills to proceed to the 4th point.
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair, board members, I'll wrap up a couple quick things. Just remember, student assignment, next year we'll be working on the high school attendance boundaries. That was something we voted on a while back. Dr. Williams and I have been working to get our data files ready, and folks in transportation, especially Emily, has worked really hard to get our boundaries and data files clean and ready, so we're getting close to that. And when we do that, we'll be able to start going through some scenarios, but that is something we definitely needed to do when you look at the disparity between Bettyfield and the other 2 high schools. But that will be in place, and we'll work through all that next year with all the input and the sharing of information as we go along, as has been done in the past, but also, you know, that's in preparation for the 24-25 school year. I did want to touch base about the field trip bus tour items. Again, you set priorities on those based on what could get done quickly, as well as the funding that was available, and you had that discussion. Skinner, Farlow, Kerwin provided us with the global cost estimates on the really the broad kind of plan for the work that could be done, and that information has been shared with you and the county manager. Again, those are very extensive, and we talked some about that. We did have a conversation with them to revisit those designs, to look at how they could reduce the cost of those. That seems to be a conversation that you had, as well as we have with the county manager. So there are some tweaks. As much as they've done a great job of going back each time with the scenarios for Frederick Douglass, that's something that that they can now go back and look at with starting with the vestibules, to go back and look and see what tweaks can be made from the design standpoint. That would still provide for safe environments for our faculty and staff and students, but also work within the confines of the buildings we have and meet DPI requirements. That's something that they will tell you that they have to send forth and have, especially those projects be reviewed. But we've asked them to go back and review those, so we'll have information like that shared at a later date. And that's something I'll go back and share again with the county manager, but I want you to know that I did share that at your request. There are some new processes with the county manager. You know, Ron Hunt is the new county manager, have been the assistant county manager. I just wanted to share those with you briefly. We're having monthly meetings. We just had one this week, and we've got this scheduled. We're looking at having a shared master spreadsheet for all of our projects involving the county funding. So one thing we had is sometimes, I'm not a big fan of Google. I'm sure that comes as a shock to some people in this room. But it does have some strengths. I grew up on Novell and other tried and true network things. But there are some commonalities of having a master spreadsheet and knowing one source of information. But I think that'll be a good thing for us, because we've all got dueling spreadsheets with different dates and different times if somebody's put something in. So he and I have talked about some things we can do to keep track of our projects together. We're expecting 2 things from the county that I'll share with you and that you'll need to give some feedback on. A draft document that delineating the process for capital projects, something that they've talked about and they're looking at, and I'll share that with you because we'll need to provide input on that, as well as the county does have a position for a project engineer, and that has been moved to the next fiscal year as to provide support for our district projects, and you will need to provide some information and input on that, and we need to look at that, how that would work with some of our requirements of our legalities as well, but also with our projects. But our finance officers, our new finance officer, as well as our soon-to-be retiring one, have met with their new finance officer, and they will continue to meet along with myself and Ron to talk about various projects and processes. And so the communication there with Ron is really good, and so I just wanted to share that with you in terms of what's been different over the last little bit. So just want to give you that quick update. And then
Well, before you.
Yep.
Oh, that's okay.
Yep.
I'm reading ahead.
Reading ahead, yeah, thank you. All right, last but not least, for you read ahead people, next steps, there you go. The next work session is scheduled for May 8th at 2 p.m. So check your calendars. All right. And some of the tentative items we've mentioned today are, we want to talk about the Stantonburg Spate consolidation and really be able to say more about that. We mentioned last time, but there's some more information I'm gonna bring back, and our folks have been working on. But the public school renovation funds is another source of funding from the state that we have access to, a pool of money now, and will throughout next year. But it can only be used for certain types of projects. But it would fit well for our changes that we could do at Bedingfield for the CTE Culinary Arts and esports programs, along with some of our existing funds. And we're also talking about the wash clinic at Bedingfield and relocating that inside the building. And then I actually think when we get through some of these, we really need to have a discussion about how do we prioritize our existing other facility needs, including athletics and painting, just as examples. But there's a litany of things that we need to talk about, but we've been doing some of the bigger stuff. But now if we can get some of those on the table, we need to talk about how we want to prioritize some of these other ones and start having those conversations, because they're not going away. So that's kind of like the next steps. And if you have additional items, I just ask that you let me know in between, and because that one's going to sneak up on us pretty quick. This one did with the break and everything else. So Madam Chair, that's all I have.
Well, let me begin by thanking you and the staff, as well as the architects and the builders for all of the work that has gone in. I thank the county commissioners for their continued work with us in helping to make our facilities be the best that they can be. Members of the board, if there are areas that you feel need to be added, please make sure you share that with Dr. Mills so that as they are doing the preparation for the next work session, we can have as much on the table as we can possibly bear. It's going to be a busy year. And for those who have not been through redistricting, get ready, get ready, get ready, because that becomes a very emotional issue as well. As much as closing any school, when you start moving our students, it becomes a very difficult time, and we have to hear those comments. So, as he's already indicated, we will be looking at the redistricting, particularly at the high school level, for next year, so that it will be in place for 24, 25. So, for all the work that has gone in, I thank you for the decisions, members of the board, that you have made to move us forward. I thank you. And if there is nothing else to claim our attention, the chair will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Madam Chair, I move for adjournment.
Second.
Been moved by Mr. Breen, seconded by Mr. Mercer, that we adjourn. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, let it be known by the sign of, oh no, I've got to call the roll. I'm sorry. Mrs. Barnes? Mr. Boykin?
Aye.
Mr. Breen? Mr. Mercer? Mrs. Powell?
Aye.
Myself, Dr. Fitch, aye. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. We are now adjourned.
Madam Chair.
Yes.